it's clarifying questions, it's probing. Now you can really uncover what the needs are, right? And look, this can be applied in medical affairs. This can be applied, asking your wife about something, and actively listening. So I think these skill sets are very transferable. And as I've, more experience in my career, I'm realizing a lot of stuff I'm doing at work, I can apply at home, right? Because these are people you're dealing with.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Heart of Leadership podcast. Today, we're diving into the world of human-centered leadership with Dr. Amit Suri. A standout leader in the healthcare scene, Amit has been in the pharmaceutical, biotech, and nonprofit sector for over 15 years, bringing innovation and passion to the table. Trained as a medical doctor, Amit has tackled everything from infectious disease to neurology. He's not just about the science, though. He's also an incredible human-centered leader, known for building innovative teams and crafting powerful, forward-thinking strategies. Outside of the office, Amit's all about staying healthy and active, recently polishing off a course at Harvard on wellness. He loves kicking back with some sports, a good book, or traveling with his family. So stick around as we unpack how empathy, strategic thinking, and innovation are the key to leading successful teams, especially in the intricate world of healthcare with Dr. Amit Suri. Let's get started. Amit, welcome. I'm so happy to have you here. Thank you for joining us on the podcast.
Be here, Kip. Excited to have a conversation today about medical affairs.
All right, awesome. I'm going to dive into it right away. I've known you for a little while. I know a lot about your career. I know that you've had you've had a pretty diverse career in the medical world and in the pharma world and that kind of stuff. But I want you to share with our listeners a little bit about your history and your journey. On top of that too, I want you to talk a little bit about how that history and journey has turned you into the incredible leader, human-centered leader you are today.
Well, thank you for saying the word incredible. Appreciate that. But no, I would say that I don't have a traditional background. I have a medical background by training. I decided that, I think me practicing medicine wasn't in the cards, wasn't something that I was interested in. So I pivoted my MBA. I thought, I got my MBA, I got my medical degree, set up for pharma. That's what I did. I had those scientific background, business acumen. I started in pharma. Now, I started in pharma in the West, too far from you in Vancouver, in the world of vaccines. So yes, I've had not only a diverse background or career path in terms of therapeutic areas, started in vaccines, understood immunology, pivoted from there into diabetes, cardiovascular disease, done things in neurology, rare diseases, very diverse in terms of the therapeutic area, but also companies I've worked for. Prior to pharma, I was in the nonprofit world in heart stroke. And, I've worked for big companies, smaller companies in the pharma, non-traditional companies within healthcare. I think, a lot of things, and what I've really carried, I think, throughout my career path is certain things I think that have made me successful, I would say. And I think starting first, I think, is really about being agile and being adaptable. And we'll get into a bit of more change. But I think in today's environment, you have to have that agility and adaptability. You hit the ground running and work in ambiguous situations. So I think having a plan, but not a rigid plan, some sort of plan that tells you there's the North Star, there's where I'm going. And, having some bits and pieces that allow you to sort of support a journey. The last really piece, or a couple pieces, I would say, is medical, and as you continue your journey, the importance of being confident. And I don't think that's only medical, but I think just as a leader, you have to be confident in knowing what you know. I think the offset of confidence, in my opinion, is humility. So I think you have to have a good balance between being confident, but also being humble, right? A lot of us have a lot of information, knowledge, but we don't know everything. And I think that's important. Ask the questions if you don't know. Learn that very early in medicine. If you don't know, ask, because, it's life and death, right? Now within pharma and the corporate world, maybe it's not as imminent as life or death, but still things could go wrong. So ask the questions. And then a couple of other things I would just, sort of highlight is thoughtful risk taking. No risk, no reward. Doesn't mean you're going to sort of darts at the board and see what sticks. You still have to have the plan. You still have to have the vision, but take the risk because you're not going to have all the information at your fingertips at that time to make the right decision. So, and lastly, I weave it in. It's working that ambiguous. Know enough, but do you know all of it to make sure it's successful or ensure it's successful? Maybe not. But I think having that confidence, taking those risks, I think has set me up for success. And look, it didn't always start that way, right? This is an evolution of 15 years of my journey within the industry.
Right. It's interesting. I mean, something you touched on there is the risk taking. How do you first, where did that become something for you? Because it's not a normal thing for people to be able to just jump in there and make those calculated risks. Like, what happened that allowed you to build that skill?
Well, I think the first one is trying and failing. I think
right,
it's important. I think having a culture where this is not always the case, but having a culture that allows you to fail. I think supports not failure. Of course, failure, let's quantify that here. Failure is not doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different response. Like that's the definition, as we know, with insanity, right?
Right, exactly.
In the beginning, you're not going to know everything, so you have to take that. But I think you have to have the right people and the culture around you to support that. So I had good teams, and leaders that allowed me to fail, gave me the confidence that, what, I failed this time. Look, these are the 3 learnings that I've taken. And now let's apply them to the next time I make a decision or a career change, etc. So that's important. I think in the team, in the organization, having that support, but also at home, family. I think a lot of your family environment dictates how you're going to be at work. That support, that somebody trusting you, somebody giving you that freedom, autonomy to fail, I think is important. And that's helped me. My leaders not always were giving me that free rein. I was always sort of that individual that would push back a little bit, keep pushing. I think those kinds of things help me navigate that navigate that.
Yeah, no, I mean, that makes perfect sense. And it makes sense that, you learned that from those above you and giving you the space and stuff like that. And I know that's something that you do with your teams. I'm curious about something else too. So in that realm of, calculated risks, taking those risks and having that safe environment, the environments that you work in are super fast, super data driven, super heavy on the science, all that kind of stuff. How do you balance that side with also being super empathetic and emotionally supportive and really creating a team that is there for each other when they fail, when you have innovative challenges and things like that? What are some tips that you may have for people on building that culture?
Good question. I think at the outset, as a leader, you have to have, I think, at least a vision, sort of a plan, and I think building your team around that, building a team that understands kind of how everybody's contributing to that North Star. We work in big companies, we work in big organizations, and sometimes when you're, I wouldn't say the lowest person on the totem pole, but somebody out in the field, for example, an MSL, right? Ensure whatever they're doing aligns, adding value to a project that is in Canada, that is a smaller project that's going to Europe or the parent or the headquarters. So I think it's all about knowing what I do day to day contributes to that bigger picture, contributes to moving that needle in the right way, in the right direction. I think you can't do anything without a proper team. So a lot of emphasis is hiring the right people, developing, training the right people, because when you do that, and that's what I say to my team, is my job is I work for you. So I've empowered you, I've given you the information, I've allowed you to fail, I've communicated with you. Now go out and do the work, do the job. But you know what? Let's keep in contact. Let's ensure that whatever you're doing is still aligned. And if it's not, sometimes we have to pivot, right? That's the beauty of running a strategy. And I always say, strategy is not something that's static in nature. It's dynamic. It's got to change with the environment. Otherwise, you're going to be left behind. Your competitors have kind of sensed what's happening in the environment, taken those insights back into the company, and now have pivoted somewhat. Again, being agile, being adaptive. I don't know if I answered your question.
You did. No, it's good. I think I'm curious too about. So there's something you said. Having the right team, bringing the right people in. How do you hire? Like, what's an interview with you like? Like, what are you looking for? If somebody was going to apply to be on your team, how do you pick the right person for you?
Question. I mean, I fortunate not only in my career managing people, but I've also overseeing the residency program through PharmDs coming in the industry, the future healthcare leaders. Actually, good question. I mean, first and foremost, you're in medical. Yeah, you have a scientific background, you have scientific acumen. And I think that's kind of the base for me. But that's not what is going to differentiate someone, candidate A from candidate B, for example. A lot of what I look for is fit. As we know, we spend a lot of time, pre-pandemic in the offices, and post-pandemic kind of a hybrid between being online, but you're interacting with these people 8, 9, 10 hours a day. They're your family. It's great you have somebody who's super smart that can regurgitate data, but can you work with this individual 8 to 10 hours? Does this individual get it? Is there a fit there? Is there a personality fit, fit in terms of values that I also look for? And then, of course, we work in science, but you have to have, let's not fool ourselves. We still work for a for-profit company. We're on the medical side to preserve scientific integrity and accuracy. At the same time, we're part of a business. So I think having some sort of business acumen is important. We don't talk a lot about it in medical affairs because it's all about, data and science, like you talked about, and managing our physicians, but about driving the business. And I think that's important. When you're out in the field as an MSL, like your own business, you have to deliver on certain things, you have certain metrics, have certain projects. I think having a medical background or a scientific background, I would say, good is the sort of the base. I think having some business acumen, and then it's having a conversation like, can I talk to this person? Is this person somebody, he or she goes out and talks to a physician, is it going to be a large data dump? Or can this individual foster a relationship, and engage and manage expectations with the customer? Be like a person, right? Not just somebody who's sharing and doing out data, to be honest.
Yeah, that's it's really interesting, and it pairs well with excuse me, sorry, it pairs well with a lot of the work that we do. We get called in a lot to help take that really data heavy, that really science heavy side to a human and help them understand how to communicate that in a much more human centric way. And it's great to see that, you're hiring and you're bringing people on with that being in the forefront right away. Because like you said, the data, the hard skills, the very science side of that is a baseline, right? You should have that. But how to communicate with human beings and put that across to the world is what's really going to make the difference between you and the next person, right?
Like what you said there, Kip, something I forgot to mention is sort of, we deal often with, sometimes complex complex information that needs to be shared, but how do you put it in bite-sized pieces, translate that to make sense? So you have to be able to do that internally with your stakeholders who may not have the advanced scientific background that you do, but you got to get the so what. Like, why are you telling me this? Like, what's the so what for me? I think putting it in bite size versus regurgitating pretty, heavy clinical scientific data, you'll look at me and say, okay, and even a physician say, yeah, so what? Like, why are you telling me this? So I think you have to be able to maneuver, be able to sort of and share information that makes sense and people can understand it.
Yeah, it's super important. It's something that I know that it's interesting because it's something that I know you're very good at. I've seen you do it. And I think because for you it's a natural skill, a lot of people don't realize that when you're saying those smaller chunks, when you're saying like break it down in pieces like that, when you do it, you tell a story, right? You take it from that, and I've worked with people and no word of a lie come into a meeting and they have a slide deck and there's 120 slides on it, right? For this one topic. To me, I giggle. I'm like, oh my God, how did you think that was a good idea? But that's because I'm so used to the other side, right? I mean, I know the data's heavy, I know everything else. And I've always thought to myself, I'm like, that's super important. But unless you grab people, unless you get them emotionally engaged in what you're talking about first, the data won't matter. People won't want to listen to you past that. I know that's something that you're really good at. Do you have any tips or techniques or tricks that you employ or that you teach your team or anything like that? Is there anything or?
I mean, I think, when we are part of the team, it's, we talk about presentations. So a lot of what we in medical do, well, not a fair bit anyway, is to present, whether we're presenting internally, whether we're presenting externally, and it's data, right? So how do you think what you highlighted is key, telling the story. For me, have I taught that formally or explicitly? Probably not. But in my communications and my feedback to my team, I'm always like, when we look at the data, before we even get into the slide, like, what are we trying to accomplish here? And the other piece before that is, who's the audience? Like, you can
Perfect.
develop data, and if you have about a bunch of hardcore scientists, all means, get into the data, right? That's what they're there for. If you've got, and often this happens, you've got a mixed bag of healthcare providers. You've got physicians who are experts. You've got physicians that normally not really treat the patient, but are part of patient journey. And then you've got nurses there. Now you've got a mixed bag with different skill sets, different experiences, different knowledge base. Know your audience first. I think that's key. And that's what I let people, we have that discussion. Well, who are you presenting to? Well, I'm presenting to, the payers in Canada. Well, okay. Well, what things or questions do you think they're going to ask or want to know? Start from the back end, and then you build your deck out to that, because now you're actually focusing on the customer, can, articulate the value proposition, kind of why this is important, and now you've hit the mark. So I think, and that doesn't happen overnight, right? That's sort of the iterative process of, getting a sense of who your customers are, and then delivering them what they think you think they need. And if that's a guess, ask them up front, or you ask them beforehand, or you do your homework up front to say, this is what you're going to want to know. Let's focus on that.
Yeah, it's really important. I agree with you, and I think it's fantastic that you've touched on it a few times already. Is that ask those questions, right? Ask better questions. Get the knowledge, understand what it is, because I think it's really easy to fall into the habit of, a pathway of like A, B, C, D. We present, right? And I've seen a lot is that nowhere in there on any of those letters is the okay, we need to check in with the stakeholders and see what's going on. Like, let's do some recon here and figure out what's going on in this specific situation. We can't just regurgitate the same thing over and over again, the same way, again, like you said before, and expect a different result. Right. So I think that's fantastic that you integrate that into, part of.
And I think that just comes into, when I think about how I interact, and this is a solution for me as well, as you talked about, it's active listening, right? It's you have to actively listen, which means you're not just sitting there and just, eyes rolled and you're getting information through your ears. It's clarifying questions, it's probing. Now you can really uncover what the needs are, right? And look, this can be applied in medical affairs. This can be applied, asking your wife about something, and actively listening. So I think these skill sets are very transferable. And as I've, more experience in my career, I'm realizing a lot of stuff I'm doing at work, I can apply at home, right? Because these are people you're dealing with. You want, to the needle on certain things, and influence people, and et cetera. So I think, I'm a strong proponent, really sort of understanding the unmet needs where I go in and jump and start delivering information, data, whatever it is.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Good stuff. I'm curious about, I know in every job, there's a lot of change, but I definitely know medical affairs, pharma, that world, there's constant. And when I say change, it's not just a slight shift. Sometimes it's a complete 180, you're change. There's a ton of change. How do you what are kind of some of the core principles that you have that keep you grounded? And how do you also keep your team grounded and positive and into it when those things happen? Because some of them can be really defeating.
And it's a great question. And I think first thing to understand and recognize is change the norm. Like, I think if you think change is an anomaly, means it's not going to happen as much as you think, then I think you're missing the mark. So I think embracing it and saying, look, change is inevitable. Now, it depends on what company you work for, what industry. There may be more change or less change, but I think that inevitability is there. It means I think you have to, and we talked a bit about this, you have to have a plan. It doesn't have to be, a 50, PowerPoint slide deck, but, where do you want to go? How do you want to get there? And how do you define success? I mean, I think just those three sort of questions to ask yourself and build, your offering around those things, I think is important. I think breaking it down is important. How do you break things down? So, the way I break it down is, and not very different from what I do in my personal life either, is what can I control? What I can't control? Focus on the things you can control, right? You have able to sort of, put things together, and that's in your control. Anything else, you do the best you can. So I think understanding where you can have the impact and that control piece becomes important. I think we talked about managing change is also not afraid to fail. There's a lot of change happening, so you're going to make decisions with sometimes not enough information, maybe working ambiguity. Having that thoughtful risk taking, having that sort of sure that failure is not going to be the end of the biggest thing here. So let's move on that. I think communication, right? Like, you're managing change, you're managing a team, have to be able to communicate. And when I hear communication, it's just me talking to the team. It's bi-directional. It's on email. It's a WhatsApp chat. It's text me. It's being approachable. It's being available to your team. It's, in my opinion, one of the ways it's important to manage change, because your team is there, they may be struggling. They may be, trying to figure out, it's the best project at this time, move from, this operating system, a change. We've moved from this CRM, or we didn't have a CRM, customer relationship management tool. Now we're, okay, well, what are the issues? What are the challenges you're facing? So, I think those kinds of discussions, and that, I think, for me, boil down to being open as a leader, right? You have to be open, and especially in the face of change. And then lastly, it's the team. You have to empower the team. You got to give them the confidence, have to give them the tools, the skill sets, and go. Let them, explore. Let them fail if they need to. And of course, when I talk about failure, and I mentioned a couple of times, it's not like you haven't done the homework and you're going to enter an area and you're going to lose millions and millions of dollars. It's not like that. It's calculated risk. It's caring enough, be agile, to be adaptable. So I think those are some of the things that I think use personally, but also I with the team on how to manage some of those things.
I think that's fantastic. It's interesting. You brought up something. You touched on about 4 of the questions I was going to ask you there. So that's awesome. Thank you. But there's something I want to dive into a little bit more, is that when I knew you and had experiences with you was pre-COVID. And then that's where we built a friendship and things like that. But you were known for, in the office, touching base, like getting in there and communicating and being around, and you were there and you were available and physically around. And I think that whether that was conscious or not, or just your personality, that really helped your world. What is remote work like now? That hybrid. What have you done? What are you doing? How are you keeping that going? How are you keeping that? Like, are there tools that you use? I know you mentioned a few of them, but like, what are some of your strategies in keeping your team connected and communicating now?
It's a great question. I mean, so, definitely the pandemic, I think, accelerated, not only in our industry, but every industry, sort of this virtual model. We had sort of webinars, we had some video meetings, pre-COVID, and all of a sudden COVID hit and it was like, everybody's online, and I think we did as an industry suffer some fatigue, of virtual fatigue, not only within the organization, but also within our physicians. So I think, I think what I'm seeing now in terms of trends is that's sort of moving back a little bit. I don't think we'll ever be in a scenario where you'll be mandated or required to come 5 days in the office. I think that is long gone. I think now it's having a hybrid, and I do find there's an importance of being. A couple things. I think the office is important. I do believe that. There may be conflicting opinions on that, but having a presence, and maybe not every day, but strategically a couple of days a week, and that's what we do. Done in the past is you align with your other stakeholders, your medical, your marketing, your regulatory, etc., and you come in on a couple of days because it's great to see the person and chat with them and have those water cooler discussions and talks, because good things sometimes come out of them, right? Maybe not hard data,
Exactly.
but
You can't. Yeah, I agree with you. You can't replace that. We've tried with all these different apps and things like that. And I think that's great. So I'm just excited about that. I think that's fantastic because you need the human connection, right? You need to physically shake a hand. You need to see somebody in the eyes and feel a vibe. And I think that's awesome.
But then, of course, now we have the other side where, for a period of time, we would have 8, 10 Zoom meetings a day, right?
Yes.
Right. So I think part of, for me, it was difficult, to be completely transparent. But I think what's important is that it's okay to say no. Like it's, in the sense that, if I'm asked to have 20 different meetings or 10 different meetings in a day, well, I need to be there. My
Right.
value in terms of being at those meetings, because initially I would just accept every single meeting, and then I realized like half the stuff I really need to be. I can follow up. I can get an email. So I think try to empower the team and say, look, if you're going to be asked to join a meeting, like why are you there? Value are you bringing to those meetings? And if it's not a meeting, because what ended up happening post pandemic is, those water cooler talks, Kip, I'd meet you and we'd chat. Well, now I don't have that. So I'm going to book a meeting with you for 30 minutes.
Yes. And I was
Right.
going to say, there's so many meetings now because we're craving the connection we didn't have before, right?
Right. So I think that is part of it. I think it's knowing what meetings to be at, and I think the value you can add. And if you don't need to be there, then follow up. So I think that helps to reduce of the and hope and I think allows for success in this new hybrid environment. I think there's I think that maybe hasn't changed for me too much as I communicate, whether it's picking up the phone, texting. That's just my style. I'm a very need a question asked. Here you go. Pick up the phone. Right. You don't need to send an email. That's that's the other thing we really sort of empower my team is everything has to be over email, and be careful what you put in an email. Sometimes things are lost. So if it's too long, rule of thumb, it's like more than a paragraph or two, pick up the phone, because now you've inundated somebody else, and you could get your answer 2 minutes picking up the phone versus I send you an email and next week you're going to tell me I could have asked you within a minute. So I think that
it's genius like that. And I want to touch on that too a little bit, because I have this conversation with clients quite often, the coaching clients that I work with, and they're like, well, I don't know. Should I phone them and bother them? Should I phone, I'm like, would you go and peek your head in their office before and say, hey, you got a minute on this? They say yes, or maybe no. But the insight that I wanted to glean from it was that you gain other insight. right? So like a text is very impersonal. An email, it doesn't matter how many emojis you put on it, it's still impersonal, right? And it can be totally misread depending on the mood of the other person. But if you pick up a phone call now, right, pick up a phone and dial somebody up, you're going to get some pieces of their tone. You're going to get maybe some other topic pieces that might come up. You're getting a little bit more into that human side than just jamming out an email or showing up on a Zoom call or something like that. So I think that's awesome, is to reinforce that, give a call. We need to hear your voice.
The thing is that, another strategy is don't have the meetings an hour long or 2 hours long. Like, have them appropriate, right? Because we've all been in meetings or town halls that are like 2 or 3 hours. And I can guarantee if you're off camera, are you listening or are you doing other work? If you're doing other work more often than you're listening, you got to check yourself and say, should I really be at this meeting, or I need to prioritize other things or this meeting and really be present and be focused? Because I think that presence, or I think lack of presence, I'm seeing that a lot more post COVID in the virtual environment. There's just so many things where,
yeah, I agree.
Yeah, where if you're in the office, I'm standing in front of you, unless I'm rude and I'm on my phone right in front of you, I can't really avoid you. But when you're in the virtual space, you can hide a little bit. Right? I think that presence is important.
Yeah, it's a key thing, and one of the things that I'm working on with a coaching group that's going on right now is implementing a certain style of one-on-one. And I won't get deep into it here, but it's the premise of it is doing the one-on-ones, having a head and a heart one-on-one that lasts about anywhere between 10 and 20 minutes once a week, and you're not getting into any of the work that's going on. Basically, they're talking about work if they need to address some certain things, but you as the leader are really just trying to get a gauge on where they are, what's going on in their world, at home, personal, here at work, that kind of stuff. And you're getting that meter that you would normally get if you were in the office and you were able to see somebody come in, watch their posture, know something's wrong, that kind of stuff that we don't get anymore. You need to work that into a one-on-one. And the point of it is that only needs to be between 10 and 20 minutes once a week. And then you have if you ask the right questions, and it's a bit of a process to learn how to do it, but you ask the right questions, you can really get a good understanding of where everybody's at emotionally. And again, emotionally is what's going to drive what's going on everywhere anyway. And then the other meetings can be a lot shorter, a lot more concise. It can be in an email if it's a short point of view. It just reduces the amount of needless communication that isn't really communication anyway. It's more just showing up and allowing somebody else to talk for a minute.
No, I completely agree. I could highlight, there's leaders that I've had in the past who were very transactional, like you talked about, okay, did you do this? Okay, perfect. Great job. See you later. And then there's those transformative leaders, right? That point will now a sense of what's driving you, what drives Kip, what are issues, challenges you have, what motivates him, what are barriers for him, and then in that holistic discussion. I like the way you put it, and I must admit, I maybe not as maybe incorporated that formally. What I do is that I have one-on-ones with my team, but in there I've added this growth and development, like where do you want to go, what do you want to be, how are things, and I often open even my one-on-ones that are very but have a tactical component, have a transactional component. Always checking in, look, at the end of the day, we're not robots, we're humans. Like, how are you feeling, how are things going? And that's where empathy comes, right? And empathy is a big word. That's where you have to understand where this person is coming from, and maybe there's stuff going on in their personal lives that's impacting their work, etc. So I think having that relationship and that dialogue, very, very important, because otherwise just doing the tactical stuff or the transactional stuff, it just scratches the surface, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. And I love jamming about this stuff with people like yourself who've been leading exceptional teams for a long time, because the principles that we teach when we're teaching new leaders, or even reminding, like some of the senior executives that I have, they'll get caught up in a lot of the technical side of their work, and it's very easy to do that, right? And it's nice chatting with you to reiterate what it is that we do teach and we do practice really is effective, right? I mean, we've got our 4 pillars, right? The first one and the most important one is know yourself, right? You've got to know who you are as a human being, and that's a whole long topic. Then you've got to know your people, right? Like, you've got to know about them and know what's going on, because like you said, we're human beings, right? We are governed by our emotions, whether we pretend that we are or we're not. That's what, at the end of the day, makes the decision. And then you've spoken quite a bit about it, is that knowing your purpose, right? Knowing your purpose as a human being, as a team, as a corporation, and incorporating all those things is massively important. And then our last one is something that you touch on as well, is knowing your path, right? So, and in that is the plan, the strategy, all of those kind of pieces, right? And integrating those together. Like I said, it's really exciting for me to chat with leaders like yourself who do implement all those pieces and bring them together. It just really solidifies that human-centered side of leadership. It's amazing. Hats off to you, if I had a hat.
I appreciate that. And look, this is evolution for me. I think evolved over time as a person, as a leader. And I think the only thing I would touch upon in terms of leadership for me that I think that has helped, and I think you asked that question earlier on, didn't highlight, is vulnerability. I think
Yes.
your vulnerability to people allows them to come in, because you're not this sort of actor or whatever your title is, sitting in this ivory tower. You're a person like anybody else that makes mistakes, that has a family, that has good days, that has bad days. And I think showing that vulnerability and letting people in, I think allows people to be better leaders, in my opinion, showing that vulnerability.
I agree wholeheartedly. It's a huge point. I'm so happy that, Brene Brown, basically championed that and brought it to the forefront, and saying, vulnerability is super important. It is one of those things that takes a minute to learn, because, being able to be vulnerable with your family and stuff like that is very natural. Understanding where, when, how much, those kind of things takes a minute in the corporate world, right? And there's some, testing, and one of the big things that I talk about with my clients, and we had a long chat a little while ago, was I was like, I don't know if I should be vulnerable about this. I want to be, but is now the right time? And it was interesting that timing is also a very important thing with vulnerability and those kind of things. So, point being is that hugely important, agreed, massively important. Also, be generous with yourself with learning how to do it, because it takes a minute. And I'm sure you can, attest to that as well.
Absolutely. You don't want to sort of expose yourself to the point where you're at risk of, wow, he didn't know that. Oh, he have known that. Oh, okay. So to your point, right? Like, the when, also the what but also you have to be in the right culture for that too, right? Like, to
Yes.
be able to demonstrate that and have that openness. I think, most companies are trying to get there. I think that's important.
I think it's important too. And you're right. The companies want to get there. And what I've seen with that, it's in, in circus and connected to psychological safety, is that companies really want that to happen. I have yet to meet a company where everybody feels psychologically safe. I have met departments and groups within the companies that have strong psychological safety, and others maybe, and it works like that a little bit more, because there's so much change, right? There's so many things that change and evolve and stuff like that. I think it's great that companies keep trying for it and keep pushing for it, and it's a fantastic lesson. On that, how do you keep psychological safety in the forefront with your teams? Because I know that they quite often, I've talked with people that worked with you, and that psychological safety is a thing. How do you keep supporting that within your group? Is there anything you do consciously?
Good question. I mean, I think for me, I think that psychological safety comes from being open, being vulnerable. I think has made it successful for me. I think bring my personality. I'm not just a robot who's going to talk about data and strat plans, etc. It's just humanizing things. And I think, and we talked about that openness, or that okay to fail, right? Like, I think those kinds of things are important because that gives psychological safety. If I'm on the other side and I hear my director say, you know what, the plan in place, so fail, or there's a sense of, if you fail, it's not going to be good. If I'm on the other side, I'm thinking, shit, this is not for me. It's not a safe environment.
Right.
I'm not going to take the risk, which means I'm not going to innovate, which means I'm not going to move the needle, right? So I think that's very important for me. And I think, I wouldn't say it's common sense. So, it's a misnomer because a lot of common sense things most people don't do. I just think
Exactly.
thinking those things through a little bit, right? Like, would you safe? What makes you feel safe? Well, it's when somebody trusts me. Somebody has given me the right tools and education and training. I feel safe, allowing me to fail, allowing me to reach you, allowing me to, that you're approachable, a person like me that has good days and bad days. So I think those kinds of things allow for that, psychological safety.
I think that's brilliant. Well, very well said. That's awesome. I'm curious about, I want to shift, we'll do a little bit of a shift. Pharma is constantly evolving. The world of medical affairs is constantly evolving. I want you to look into a crystal ball right now and give me some guesses on what you think the next big steps are. Where's the industry going? And not just on the technical side, but like for people joining in right now, what do you think they should expect coming into the
Question. So, I think right off the bat, whether it's in pharma or any other industry, it's data, 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 which is, we have a lot of data, but how do you now, and where the industry or the moving is, how do you use how do you use data, make decisions, right? So I think a lot of companies have done it from a cost-cutting perspective. You can use AI and algorithms to identify, better cost structures, et cetera. How do you now use data to predict? How do you use data to generate insights? How do so I think, and I think we're not there yet, but I think that's something that's coming. That's something that's there, that, certain companies are farther along than others. But I think that's very, very important. It's how do you use data in a way, so for example, working in the rare disease space, right? You have a rare disease, a rare symptom that often requires 4 or 5 different physicians to touch on that patient. And the diagnosis is often 10, 15 years delayed. Where,
right?
if you diagnose early, you get treatment early. And so this can be devastating for a lot of patients and families. So I think having, for example, in the rare disease space is helping algorithms. You help algorithms to say, if you have a symptom of, sort of, cardiac symptom, for example, shortness of breath, and that's maybe a little bit too broad, but how do you then flag those EMR, electronic medical records, that to say, now, anytime anybody has these 2 or 3 symptoms, let's highlight them and let's investigate further. That's
Right.
been successful. Those strategies, approaches, projects have been successful in rare disease. Now you're using the data you have, leveraging it. So I think data, big data, I think is going to be important. I think in pharma, it's all about real world evidence data. So what's happened, as we know, we run clinical trials in a very confined setting. You have, usually 2 or 3 years, for example, certain patient target, certain disease target, and that's it. Now, what happens with that drug from a safety profile 10 years down the road? No. I think now companies, payers especially, want that real world evidence. Outside of the hospital setting, you're on a medication and you're on it, want to be able to track you. Because what we may have not seen in that 2-3 years in terms of an effect, we may see 5 years later or 4 years later, right? So I think managing real world evidence data is going to be important. Use this buzzword called omni-channel, world of pharma. And what that means
Yes.
is how do you engage your customers, where you put the customer at the center, and you figure out how does that individual want to receive information? Yeah. Engagement, projects. So you could say, you're one of my KOLs, my key opinion leaders. I'm going to put you at the front and center. I'm going to say, you know what? You never go to conferences. Never go to conferences. You're not going to get the data. Now, I would have these meetings in advance and say, well, how does Kip want to receive that information? Does he want me to come to his office? No, I think Kip is fairly busy. What resonates with him is quick summary, synopsis after the Congress, and we'll send it to him. We'll say, you know what, Amit, why don't you come in and give me a presentation and a talk? Updates are just mass email because they're just very high level. What kind of projects are you interested in? What is it, a digital play with you? Are you savvy enough that a lot of stuff you do digital and you want to be engaged in digital projects, webinars, podcasts, whatever it be? I think omni-channel is becoming a big piece because there's many ways to reach the customer, but you got to customer in the front, identifying the unmet needs again, and how does that individual want to receive information? I think the last piece, we often in pharma say we put the patient in the center. May or may not be true. Everybody has that vision, but then how do we make sure that the patient is in the center? And I think we're seeing now, and not only in clinical trials, but voice of the patient. These patient-reported outcomes are important.
Yes.
You have the hard data, the primary outcomes, the secondary outcomes, but then these patient-reported outcomes, at the end of the day, the patient's the one taking the medication. So maybe you want to get a sense of what's working, what's not. You could sit there and say, you know what? Injectables, patients hate injectable drugs. They prefer oral. Well, not always the case, right? So, for certain medications,
It's so nuanced. Yeah, and that's a side there I've seen a lot too, where we're getting called to come in and help with understanding how to ask better questions, right? How to listen deeper, how to, again, because our side's the human side, the behavioral side, right? So how do you take people that have been so data centric for so long and coach them and teach them to become very human centric and understand the patient much more than what it is on a spreadsheet? Sit to have a conversation, pick up on the cues, know what's being said, all those pieces. So I think I agree with you on that. I think that's going to be a very big thing coming forward.
And I like the way you said that. It's human centric, right? Because we think the data is great. Data is going to resonate with the patient, but let's ask the patient. Is maybe we think the safety profile is great. You give the medication to the patient, and it's like he had these big GI issues, and for that patient, it was horrific. For another patient, yeah, I can deal with it, manage it. So I think it's important in getting a sense of what's important to the patient.
Yeah, it's a fascinating world too for people that come from a data centric side, because data is very logical, right? That's the kind of the whole point of it, right? It's very logical. It follows a path. Human beings are not logical at all. Our behavior, that's one of the biggest things about behavioral science that, we try to help people understand. There's even TV shows, Predictably Irrational, like all of those, Dan Ariely's work is, we don't do things that make sense. Our gut, it makes sense. Our emotions, it makes sense. Sure, it should happen. That's the same with the common sense thing, right? It doesn't exist because we are so unbelievably irrational as human beings. The reason we do something may not come across in the data, right? And you have to be able to break that down and understand that. It's a powerful tool.
Exactly. And I think your second part to that question was more advice for the next generation as well.
Yes.
Right. So I think leaders coming in, and I've had some experience in this again, managing the sort of PharmDs that come in. After PharmD school, they do like this internship for a year. So you get these young minds, super savvy, super smart. Often my advice is, you either For one, you develop your career, you either want to be a therapeutic area expert, and there's no right or wrong answer. You love and you're passionate about a therapeutic area. Oncology, I know oncology. I have personal experience with oncology. That's what I'm passionate about. That's key. You have to be passionate, right? You have to. So then I would say yes, go for that therapeutic area. We'll say, you know what, I'm not really sure. That's fine. This is also an opportunity for explore therapeutic areas, and also can be beneficial. If you're a VP or a GM, you don't need to know one therapeutic area. You got to kind of know a bit of everything. So I think that helps. Being resilient, you're going to have to be resilient. You have to a situation where sometimes things are not going to go your way, or you're not going to from A to B to C to D. You may have to go to A to F and then come back to B. That's okay. That's your own career path. That's, you're forging your own. Taking risks is important. Calculated risk. We talked a lot about thoughtful risk taking. I think that is important in your career as well. And lastly, it's that humility, confidence. I can tell you that, again, talking about people who come in and having strong scientific backgrounds, I had actually interviewed people who were brilliant in terms of the science data. They weren't the right fit, or ask them a question, they would say they could do everything. And I was like, yeah, well, it's a flag for me, because I know you can't. And I want you to have the confidence to say, you know what, I kind of know this, but I don't know that. But if I don't know that, this is what I would do, or this is my approach or my strategy. So at least I know that you can think your feet and have some idea, right? So those things I think are important, and to especially for the new leaders coming into the industry.
It's amazing advice. I love it. That's great. Good stuff. Cool. Well, I could chat with you forever. And maybe we'll have another podcast and dig in. I know you've got some exciting projects that are happening in your world and stuff like that. So, we'll see what happens in the future and check in with you. But I do have to close up a little bit. But before I do, I want to ask you 3 kind of rapid fiery type questions to get a bit more info about you. You
Sure.
cool with that?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So what is the best advice you've ever received?
I don't know if it was the best, but I think it was an advice that I really took to heart, especially as I started managing people. Hire slowly and let go people quickly. And that's not to say you let go people without sort of doing the right training and etc. But keeping people on for too long, I think, can be detrimental, especially if they're not aligned or not forming, etc. So I think there's got to be some swiftness to that, which I learned from. Let's just say that. Also, hiring the time to hire the right person. Taking that time, looking at things, and that's the advice I got. Take that time on it. You have a bit of time right now, so make sure the fit is important. And that's the other advice I got was scientific acumen's been there, but the fit. So when I talked about, this is your work family, for example, you're with them 8-10 hours a day. You gotta get along with them. There's got to be the right fit. So I think that was something that I think carried through in terms of advice. I think the other thing was, when you're speaking, be deliberate, be, honest and forthcoming. And not that I wasn't. Sometimes you don't want to hurt somebody's feelings, or sometimes you sugarcoat things, but, we're hire the right people. They have a certain level of maturity, be forthcoming, and because then you get things out of the way and get clarification right away. The other thing I really got, and I learned this over the years, was know your audience. Carry that, whether I'm talking to my family, my wife, my kids,
Exactly.
At work, is know your audience. Know that becomes important, because your audience means knowing their unmet needs and then delivering what they need. So I think those are
You've got to know your people. Yep. Yeah. So good. I love that. And I love the first one, the hire slowly and let go quickly. And just for clarification, that doesn't mean that the hiring process takes months of like waiting for the next interview and stuff like that. It's about asking intelligent questions, getting to know that human being, and
Correct.
take the time. Yeah, I think that's super key. I like this one. This was one of my favorite questions. If you could have dinner with any historical human being on the planet, who would it be and why?
Historical, I assume you mean somebody who's not living today.
Let's go with that. Sure.
Okay. For me, I think I was fascinated by this individual. His autobiography maybe a few years ago about Steve Jobs. Just
Oh, right.
his,
Okay.
just his. Love to have a chat with him and get into his mind on how he started what he did and where he ended up. And reading his book, he had uh, such a visionary and such an innovator. Yet, he had some quirks and idiosyncrasies that made him maybe not the best leader. He led this unbelievably uncanny innovation. I love his quote, what he would say, and I think that was his quote. But if you're and you talked about this PowerPoint, if you're delivering a PowerPoint presentation and you have 10, 15 slides, it means you do not know the material. Yes. Right? So it's all about, and he did this well, is telling the story. How do you tell the story? He was brilliant at that. So that's kind of the reason why I'd like to meet him. And that we've done, we have our apples, and he was part of and so he was just I just found him fascinating as a person, as a leader, as an innovator.
Very cool. Love that. And maybe you've answered this one already, but if not, it could be something else. But what's one book that you've read that had a major impact on your world?
I would say a couple. The first one, it takes me back where I had to do the reading. It was 1984, George Orwell, 1984. Believe it or not.
Right. Okay. High school. There we go. Yeah.
Yeah, high school, and I read it, and I was like, okay, what is this? We have to read this. We have to read this. And then as I read it, and then started my life and went from grades into university, I started realizing like how much the role of government and the role of others and how they're watching us. And I just found it fascinating to me that, a lot of what what is there, you put out there. Oh, is that you? That's okay. A lot of things are not in our control. And I think the 1984 book now in today's world just fascinates even more because we're almost there. Like, you could be talking about, bathroom renovations, and all of a sudden on my phone, I'll say, here you go. Here are some ideas for bathroom renovation. So Big Brother is watching, right?
Exactly.
More so now than, 10, 20, 30 years ago. So I think that maybe at that time it didn't resonate as deeply, but now over time, think about that book. I think about people listening and watching and so I think that was impactful. The other one was a book. One of my favorite artists is Bono, and it was Surrender. Phenomenal book.
It is a phenomenal book.
See them in Vegas. I remember landing in Vegas, seeing them, and just before I landed, I just finished the book. Like in this mind space of starting a band and having all the this sort of hope and everything in front of you when you're 17, 18, right? That feeling of I can do anything, right? And then starting that way, and then moving through what he did as his band in terms of evolution, innovation in music, but also what he did for humanitarian efforts and making Live Aid and that sort of piece, and then also interacting with cool musicians talk about in the book, right? Simple Minds, which I like, and other bands, and his Elvis and stuff. So I find him fascinating. I really appreciated the book, and now I just have to make my trip to Ireland, which I've never been to Ireland. So now, sort of crafting my trip based on where I want to see and what he's talked about in the book. So.
Right. And you never know. I mean, they are known for putting a little pop-up concert here and there. So maybe they're at the right time. That'd be amazing.
Exactly.
Very cool. Well, thank you for sharing your time, for sharing your wisdom and everything that you have with us today. I've really appreciated it. If people want to get a hold of you and connect with you, what's the best way to do that?
I think it's just email. First name Amit, Amit. My last name Suri, Suri, 74 at gmail.com.
Okay, yeah, we'll put it in the show notes there, and I'm sure people can get through to you on LinkedIn as well, and we'll put
Absolutely.
that down there if that works. Great.
Absolutely. Thanks. This has been great. And thank you for asking those questions. I think talked a lot about, medical and data, but I think there's a lot human side to this. I think there's a lot of soft skills, especially in terms of leadership, that I think are not only applicable here in the industry, other industries as well. So I appreciate that, and it was a great chat.
Well, thank you so much. We'll say goodbye for now. Amit, take care. Thank you again.
Last Kip, you take care. Bye bye.